Judgments are silent bullets. Fired without warning, they kill what could have been. Emma Grayson, once a shadow in a world of greed, walked away from a past stained with secrets, whispers of a life she buried deep. Now a quiet philanthropist, she hides her scars beneath a simple smile. But when a smug salesman, Jake, scoffs at her worn jacket and kicks her out of a gleaming dealership, the trigger is pulled. Her call to Nathaniel Collins, her billionaire husband with a ruthless edge, unleashes a storm. The Rolls-Royce that rolls in the next day isn't just a car, it's a reckoning. Everything Jake knows will shatter. Subscribe if you care for those in trouble. Another special story awaits. The air in the dealership smelled of leather and arrogance, a polished cage of glass and chrome where dreams were sold to those deemed worthy. Emma Grayson stepped inside, her sneakers scuffing softly against the marble floor, a stark contrast to the clicking heels of the clientele around her. She wore a faded denim jacket, its cuffs frayed from years of wear, and a plain white tee, nothing to signal the wealth that pulsed quietly beneath her unassuming exterior. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, strands escaping like whispers of a life she'd rather forget. She was here for one reason: a car for her sister Lily's birthday, a surprise to lift the weight of a year that had nearly broken them both. Jake Russo, the salesman, spotted her from across the showroom. His suit was sharp, his smirk sharper. He'd been at this game long enough to know who belonged and who didn't. To him, Emma was a smudge on the pristine canvas of his world. A nobody who'd wandered in off the street, probably lost on her way to a discount lot. He adjusted his tie, sauntering over with a practiced swagger, his eyes flicking over her like she was a stain he'd rather not touch. "Can I help you?" His tone dripped with disdain, the words less a question and more a challenge. Emma smiled faintly, brushing off the edge in his voice. "I'm looking for a car, something special. Maybe that one." She nodded toward a sleek silver sedan gleaming under the showroom lights. A modest choice compared to the ostentatious beasts around it, but perfect for Lily. Jake snorted, crossing his arms. "That's 100 grand, sweetheart. You sure you're in the right place? We don't do payment plans for people like you." His gaze raked over her again, lingering on the scuffed toes of her shoes. A few nearby customers snickered, their whispers curling around her like smoke. Emma's smile faltered, but she held her ground. "I can pay up front. Cash or wire, your choice." Her voice was steady, but inside something cracked, a fault line from a past she'd fought to bury. She'd faced worse than this: boardrooms of vipers, a father who'd sold her trust for power, a life where every kindness came with a price. She'd clawed her way out, built something better with Nathaniel. This question mark. This was nothing, or so she told herself. Jake laughed, loud and brittle, drawing more eyes. "Cash? Right. Look, lady, why don't you save us both the time and head somewhere more your speed? There's a used lot down the road. They might take pity on you." He turned away, dismissing her like she was dust on his sleeve. The room tilted. Emma's hands curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. She could feel the old rage simmering, the one she'd locked away when she left that shadowed life behind. "You don't know me," she said quietly, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. Jake spun back, his grin widening. "Oh, I know enough. Get out before I call security." She didn't move, not at first. The weight of his words pressed against her chest, each syllable a brick in a wall she'd spent years tearing down. She thought of Lily, sweet, struggling Lily, who deserved this one bright spot. She thought of Nathaniel, who'd fought beside her through darker nights than this. And then she thought of herself, the girl who'd once burned bridges to ash rather than let anyone walk over her. "Fine," she said, turning for the door. "You'll regret this." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise, soft and cold, lost in the hum of the showroom. Outside, the spring air hit her like a slap. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Nathaniel's name. Her husband wasn't just a billionaire. He was a force, a man who'd built an empire from nothing and guarded it with a ferocity that scared even her sometimes. She'd shielded him from her smaller battles, but this wasn't small anymore. It was a wound reopened, a reminder of every time she'd been judged and found wanting. Nate, she said when he answered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and shame. I need you. On the other end, Nathaniel Collins went still. His wife didn't ask for help lightly. Where are you? He demanded, already reaching for his keys. She told him. The line crackled with his silence, then, I'm coming. Stay there. Emma hung up, staring at the dealership's gleaming facade. She didn't know what Nathaniel would do. Confrontation wasn't his style unless it was surgical, precise. But she knew one thing. Jake Russo had just lit a match in a room full of gasoline. And tomorrow, when the Rolls-Royce arrived, the flames would rise. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the low growl of an engine sliced through the morning quiet outside the dealership. It wasn't just any sound. It was a rumble that vibrated in your bones, the kind that made heads turn and pulses quicken. Emma stood across the street, arms crossed, her denim jacket catching the first rays of light. Beside her, Nathaniel Collins loomed like a storm cloud given form, tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored black suit a stark contrast to her simplicity. His face was a mask of calm, but his gray eyes burned with something lethal, a predator sizing up prey. In the parking lot, the Rolls-Royce Phantom sat like a throne on wheels, its obsidian finish gleaming with quiet menace. Jake Russo arrived early that day, whistling as he unlocked the dealership doors. He'd slept well, smug in his victory over the nobody from yesterday. He didn't see the car at first, not until he stepped outside to toss his coffee cup and froze. The Rolls-Royce wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement, a shadow cast by someone he couldn't fathom. His smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. Who'd parked that here? The answer came when Nathaniel crossed the street, Emma at his side. Jake's eyes darted between them. Her, the woman he'd dismissed, and this man, whose presence filled the air like smoke before a fire. Nathaniel didn't rush. His steps were deliberate, each one a drumbeat of inevitability. Emma's gaze was steady, but her fingers brushed Nathaniel's sleeve, a silent tether between them. Morning, Nathaniel said, his voice smooth as polished steel. You're Jake, I assume? Jake blinked, caught off guard. Yeah, who are you? His bravado was there, but it wobbled, a cracked facade. Someone who doesn't like seeing his wife humiliated. Nathaniel's words landed like a punch, precise and unyielding. He tilted his head toward Emma. You met her yesterday, made some assumptions, kicked her out. Jake's mouth opened, then closed. His mind raced, piecing it together. The woman, the car, the man whose wealth radiated like heat. Look, she didn't look like... Like what? Emma cut in, her voice sharp now, edged with years of buried pain. Like I belonged? Like I could afford it? You don't get to decide that. Her eyes locked on his, and for a moment Jake saw something flicker in them. Anger, yes, but also a grief he couldn't place. Nathaniel stepped closer, his shadow falling over Jake. You judged her by her clothes, her shoes. You saw a target, not a person. That's a mistake. His tone was low, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that pressed against Jake's chest. I don't tolerate mistakes like that. Not when they hurt her. Jake swallowed, his throat dry. I didn't know who she was, okay? I'm sorry. What do you want? Money? A car? Name it. Nathaniel's laugh was a cold, hollow thing. You think this is about money? He leaned in, close enough that Jake could smell the faint cedar of his cologne. This is about respect. You don't get to buy your way out of this one. Emma touched Nathaniel's arm again, her voice softer now. Nate, let me. She stepped forward, facing Jake herself. I came here for my sister. She's been through hell, cancer, chemo, losing her job. That car was for her, a moment of joy. You took that from us because you couldn't see past my jacket. Her words trembled, not with weakness, but with the raw ache of someone who'd fought too many battles. You don't know what it's like to be invisible until someone decides you're not worth seeing. Jake shifted, discomfort crawling up his spine. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but her words stuck like thorns. He'd grown up scrapping for every dime, clawing his way into this shiny world where appearances were currency. Judging people? It was survival. But now, staring at Emma, he felt the ground shift beneath him. Nathaniel pulled a card from his pocket, a sleek black rectangle with gold lettering, and flicked it onto the hood of the Rolls-Royce. My foundation, he said. Emma runs it. Helps people you'd probably kick out too. You've got a choice now, Jake. Keep being the man who throws people away, or show up tomorrow and see what she does. Learn something. Jake stared at the card, then at the couple. The Rolls-Royce idled behind them, a silent witness. And if I don't, he asked, voice hoarse. Nathaniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll make sure every dealership in this city knows what you did. You'll be selling rust buckets by next week. Emma turned away first, walking back to the car. Nathaniel lingered, his gaze pinning Jake in place. She's stronger than you'll ever understand, he said quietly. But I'm not. Cross her again, and you'll see what happens when I stop holding back. The Rolls-Royce purred to life as they drove off, leaving Jake alone with the card and a sinking feeling he couldn't shake. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that choice, would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. And Emma? She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her mind drifting to a past she'd never fully escaped. Nathaniel's hand rested on hers, a silent promise. But the storm wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the sky pressing down on the city like a lid on a simmering pot. Jake Russo stood outside the address on Nathaniel's card, a nondescript warehouse on the edge of town, its faded brick walls hiding the hum of life within. He'd barely slept, replaying the confrontation in his mind. Emma's quiet fury, Nathaniel's cold threat, the Rolls-Royce's taunting gleam. He'd come here out of self-preservation. Nathaniel's warning wasn't idle, and Jake knew a ruined career loomed if he didn't play along. But beneath that pragmatism, something gnawed at him, a splinter of doubt about the man he'd become. Inside, the warehouse buzzed with purpose. Volunteers moved crates of food, clothes, and medical supplies, their voices a soft chorus of care. Emma stood at the center, directing the chaos with a calm that belied the storm Jake had glimpsed in her eyes. She wore the same denim jacket, but now it seemed less a mark of poverty and more a badge of defiance. When she saw him, her expression didn't soften. It hardened, a wall rebuilt overnight. You came, she said, her tone flat. Didn't think you would. Jake shrugged, hands in his pockets. Your husband didn't leave me much choice. Her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't about him, or you. It's about them. She nodded toward a line of people, families, elderly, kids with hollow eyes waiting for help. You think they don't belong either? He shifted, uncomfortable. I don't know what you want from me, lady. I said I was sorry. Emma stepped closer, her voice dropping. Sorry's cheap. You don't get it yet, do you? You didn't just hurt me. You reminded me of every time I was nothing to someone. My father sold me out for a deal when I was 16. My first boss fired me because I wouldn't play his game. I built this, she gestured to the warehouse, because I know what it's like to be invisible. You don't get to shrug that off. Her words hit like a fist, cracking the armor Jake had worn since he was a kid hustling on street corners. He judged people to survive, to climb out of the gutter. But standing here, surrounded by the quiet dignity of those Emma helped, he felt small. What do you want me to do? He asked, voice rough. Work, she said simply. See them. Really see them. And so he did. For hours, he hauled boxes, handed out blankets, met eyes he'd have avoided yesterday. There was Maria, a single mom with a toddler clinging to her leg, her smile tired but warm. Old man Clarence, whose hands shook as he took a coat, muttering thanks Jake didn't feel he'd earned. Each face carved itself into him, a gallery of lives he'd never considered. Emma watched from a distance, her silence louder than any lecture. By noon, exhaustion weighed him down, but something else lifted. Guilt, yes, but also a flicker of purpose. He hadn't felt since he was a boy, dreaming of something better. He approached Emma during a break, wiping sweat from his brow. Why do you do this? You've got money, power. You don't need to. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her. A woman who'd walked through fire and come out carrying light. Because I was them once, broke, alone. Nathaniel found me in a diner, waiting tables, hiding from a past I couldn't outrun. He didn't save me. I saved myself. This is how I pay it back. Jake nodded slowly, the pieces clicking. And him? The Rolls-Royce? That was for show? No, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. That was for you, to make you look twice. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Nathaniel strode in, his presence parting the crowd like a blade. But he wasn't alone. Lily, Emma's sister, trailed behind him, frail and pale, her chemo scarf bright against her sunken cheeks. Emma froze, then rushed to her, pulling her into a hug that spoke of months of fear and love. "Surprise," Nathaniel said, his voice softer than Jake had heard it. "Thought she'd want to see this, and I brought something else." He gestured outside where the silver sedan from the dealership sat, a ribbon draped across its hood. Lily's eyes widened, tears spilling as she clutched Emma. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Emma whispered, her own tears falling. "You deserve it." Jake watched, a lump in his throat. He'd almost taken this from them. Nathaniel caught his eye, nodding once. "A truce, not forgiveness." "You're still here," he said. "Good." The day stretched on, and when it ended, Jake stayed to help clean up. As he stacked the last crate, Emma approached. "You didn't have to stay." "Yeah, I did," he said, meeting her gaze. "I get it now. Not all of it, but enough." She studied him, then nodded. "That's a start." Outside, the Rolls-Royce waited, a symbol of power turned to grace. Jake walked home under a clearing sky, lighter than he'd been in years. Emma and Nathaniel drove Lily home, the sedan trailing behind. A quiet victory. The story wasn't over. Jake's redemption was fragile. Emma's past still shadowed her dreams. But for now, they'd all found something worth holding on to. Respect, hard-won, and real. If this tale struck a chord with you, please tap that subscribe button and become part of our storytelling family. We'd love to read your reflections in the comments. Have you ever sized someone up by their looks and been wrong, or felt the sting of being underestimated? Sharing your story could light a spark for someone else. And here's the truth. Real richness isn't in your wallet. It's in how you treat people when you think no one's keeping score. Catch you in our next tale, where another deep lesson is waiting to unfold.